Hey folks, just getting everything finished set up here. I'm gonna try to make sure that I don't sound weird like last time, so just give me a sec. Hope everybody's having a good week. Yeah, just gonna check the audio, because last time I sounded all weird, so I'm just gonna give myself a listen so that I can hear. I'm just gonna check the audio, because last time Yeah, sound all right. Okay. Weird. Alrighty. So it looks like we have a couple people in right now. Um, so this stream I started just to answer questions that people had. So just right off the top, as a disclaimer, in order for this to be successful, because it is like a Q&A, I got to have some help from you guys that are watching to ask questions so that I can then answer them. I'll do my best to find stuff to talk about, but the intention of this was to answer questions that people had just generally. I don't care what it's about. Usually it's about, video production and stuff like that. If that's the case, please ask questions, because the longevity of this kind of stream is only going to last as long as I have content. And as you probably know, if you're a content creator, coming up with content every week, even every other week, is pretty difficult. So the more you guys help by having questions ready for the streams, it really helps me to make sure that these streams keep going and that they're useful. If it's a question you have, probably other people have it as well. So I'm just going to pull up my notes. Okay. Cool. So, yeah, last week I did not do a stream. It was just a really long, difficult week. A lot of work that I had to do, not only just like at my job, but also at the house, because we're doing a lot of renovations and stuff in the house. So, takes a lot of work to do that. Um, so yeah, I mean, we have people coming in next week to do plumbing. We had the roof done. We had to get a new roof put on. Um, we just finished painting one of the rooms, so it's kind of a lot of work. So it's just kind of one of those things where it makes doing the streams every week pretty difficult. So what I'll probably end up doing um, for a while, starting with this week, is I'm going to cut the streams down to every other week, so basically around 2 a month. And my goal is to spend the time that I would have during my off week for streams to dedicate that to producing a video of some kind. Having more time to produce those kinds of videos and make something that's relevant is helpful. I kind of don't like having to create videos that are essentially just product overviews and just one-off discussions about camera brands or like a lens and stuff like that. I don't really like doing that. So I like doing things with a bit more substance to that. So there's a couple ideas that I do have that I'm kind of working with to have as my first set of videos that I do that are a bit more interesting. For color grading stuff, I think I've done most of what I really want to do until Blackmagic Design rolls out a new um, until they roll out a new update to their software. So that's kind of the difficult thing, is that coming up with new things is weird. So hey Max, can't stay long. I have some faux 8K cameras to overheat. That's it. Faux 8K cameras to overheat. I guess you're talking about the Canons. It's really weird about that. I've been looking into that more, and like people are dismantling their cameras and finding chips in there that are like the um, I guess the sensor or whatever for overheating. And some people are thinking that there's like a weird conspiracy that it's not, the camera's not actually overheating, it's like some other thing. So I don't know. I'm trying to stay out of that kind of drama if I can. Um, so yeah, that's funny. So faux 8K, I'm not sure what that means. Maybe you can explain what the faux 8K is, because I know that if it's something like they're upsampling from like a 4K image to an 8K image, that's the only thing that I can think of as like a fake 8K image, but not sure not sure exactly what you mean. Um, I'm also gonna try to pull up some stuff that I've gotten on my channel from questions and stuff. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, let's see here. Yeah, so I'm just going to, if I don't get questions in the stream, what I'll do is I'll kind of just go down and some of the comments I've gotten recently and kind of talk about those. Because like there's some cameras that have been coming out. I think Panasonic is, what's their new one? What is it? Is it S5? I don't know what it is now. Some other new full frame camera that's supposed to be amazing, I guess. I just the interesting thing, I guess, about Panasonic, if people want me to talk about that with their new camera, is that, from my understanding, they're using a different kind of autofocus setup, which is different. Like, they're not doing what many other camera manufacturers are doing with like phase detect autofocus. They're using, I think it's all contrast, and it's because of the way it's put together. Um, the I guess the more pixels there are in the sensor, the more of a problem the phase detect becomes. But I don't really know enough about that to comment too much on it. I just find it really interesting, and for autofocus, the phase detect definitely is better. So the phase detect is definitely better in video autofocus, but who knows? 8K mania and hysteria with that particular camera potentially could dissuade people who just want to use it for stills. You have a good one. Yeah, if it's the Canons with their 8K video and all that, it's like, that's what's so weird about it, is that the video production side of cameras, it looks like they've gone to such an extent to judge every regular camera based on its video capabilities, which I think is really strange. I think it's pretty unfair too, because if you're a photographer, you kind of have like your pick of. I mean, I can't think of a bad camera that's come out in the last, I don't know how long. What, last 5 or so years? You've got whatever you want, whatever you could possibly want as a photographer. But I think for some people, they just don't have enough, so you got to find something to complain about. And with video, it's like, with video production, you've got so many choices of cameras that it seems weird that the Canons kind of get a lot of flack for it. But I don't know. I don't even understand 8K anyway for most consumers. I don't really understand the need for it. I mean, I can understand the need for 4K for a lot of consumers that want to create HD content, because you have a lot of things you can do with 4K. But considering that most people are consuming content that's HD still, full HD, which is 2 megapixels, it's kind of weird that there's such a, I guess, like you're saying, hysteria for 8K. I don't really get that. It's kind of weird. Um, and like the overheating stuff, like I remember seeing stuff about overheating, and I was thinking, I can imagine that considering you're talking about 8K images. 8K is gigantic. It's a huge image. It's double 4K, so that means it's got to be 4 times the megapixels. So, it's huge. You're asking for like a tiny device to do a lot of work. So overheating seems like it makes sense for, for something like that. But, what do I know? Let's see. We'll wait a bit and see if we can get some more viewers in before we continue, because I kind of want more people here. That's kind of the other thing too, is I'll need to do something to generate more interest in the streams if I'm only going to get maybe 5 or so people coming in every so often. So, my time would probably be better spent, if that's the case, doing videos that reach more people. For example, like I know people watch the streams later, but I'd rather do dedicated videos than streams if it's going to be like maybe only 100 views or something. Like the Gen 5 color science video I have is 3.2 thousand views. And I think that's a better video on the Gen 5 color science than I've seen, or I wouldn't have done it. Thoughts on the Ursa 12K had like 4,500, and some of the other ones that I do, like creating red IPP2 LUTs. I'd like to do more videos on ACEs, considering I'm doing more with it. The thing with that is that one of the things I like to do is actually use Rec 709 footage and use ACEs to kind of give it a style, but there's quite a bit of content that I want to do. So, hey, Long Rider, thanks, man. Thank you so much. You already gave me this. You should not be giving me money. Thanks for Long Rider sent me this Fuji 27mm f2.8. It's a really nice lens. I tested it out today as I got eaten alive by mosquitoes in my backyard, and it's a really nice lens. I mean, it's so tiny, especially if you compare to the lenses I usually use, which are like the Sigma 18-35. This is, I can just put this on the camera and just go. Pretty cool little lens, and the image quality is actually really good. I'm surprised at how good it is. At 2.8, really sharp in the center, even in the left and right thirds is pretty sharp. And stopping it down to about like an f5 is really nice. So yeah, thanks, man. I really appreciate this. Yeah, I agree. We have to care for, we gotta care for each other more. I totally agree. Hey Tony, bought the Nucleus Nano. Your fault. Love it. It's really good. The Nucleus Nano is surprisingly a really good, like, cost-effective solution for doing focusing, especially if you get it set up for a lens that doesn't have hard stops. It's really amazing. Like, you basically extend the you extend how long the focus throw is on pretty much any lens that can do it. Still, like a lens like this with the Nucleus Nano would kind of suck because it's just not big enough to do that. This is obviously like a photography kind of lens that just doesn't lend itself to be able to do that. But on the Sigmas or on Rokinons and a ton of other lenses. By Rokinons, I mean like any of the ones that they have, not only the Cine ones, but their photography lenses too. I guess Viltrox is making lenses now. There's a ton of either off-brand lenses or stuff like Canon EF glass made by Canon that has really long bands for you to put on those gears. You can essentially extend the focus throw of any lens that can fit it, and the electronics, as long as you got a good connection and it's all set up right, and you're not asking the gears to overwork themselves, you can do all kinds of great stuff with it. I was really impressed when I first got it. I did not expect the quality to be as good as it was, but it's very good, and you can fit it anywhere. Do I have the Pano 25 1.7? No, I do not. I I got rid of all of my Micro Four Third glass um, a while ago, and I did not have any 25 millimeter lenses. I think it's supposed to be like a their version of like a 50, but I didn't like any of them that I had used. The lens that I liked for the cost, like the cost of the lens, was a Olympus 45 f 1.8. I think it was 45 1.8. It was a plastic cheap lens, and the image out of it, like you can make professional photos like headshots with that. But I don't like to go much shorter than that um, on Micro Four Third for like primes. It's just like, maybe it's because I stopped being like a prime shooter for whatever reason. But if I'm gonna get like a 25, I'd rather get like a zoom in that range, because usually that 25 will be kind of in the middle, and that's usually where those zooms work best. And 1.7, like on those, it's just not it's not a lens that I would buy. Maxlo's 43 millimeter. Yeah, long rider. The around 40 millimeters, like between, was it 40 and 45, whatever. Like around there, I like the focal length too. It's really nice for like medium wide shots. Um, One cheap Eric says, for small lenses, I check out cheap adjustable gearing for follow focus on eBay. It makes the diameter twice as big. I use it with some Minolta vintage glass. Well, I mean, I think for this it might be difficult. I'd have to look at it. I'm not sure. But like usually that older glass, the focus rings are larger. Like they're pretty big, so you can fit the focus gears. My problem with the Nucleus Nano is that little gear sometimes can slip if it doesn't have enough space. And like the focus gear also, like when you put, there's one thing that they don't tell you, um, excuse me, is that when you put like those zip tie gears, or if you put any of those any gear that's supposed to have the teeth for the follow focus to work properly, if you don't have that gear on completely straight, your follow focus gears are going to come out of place. And the wider that band is where the teeth are, the better it's going to be for your follow focus, so it doesn't fall off the track. That's what I've noticed. And just when you've got the smaller rings like this one, it just makes it that much harder to get a proper band for it to work. Yeah, I'm not really big. I'm not big on vintage glass. I don't really like it. So, yeah. Minolta, I tried some Minoltas. There was like a 58 that I almost bought, and I'm glad I didn't, because when I tested like a few shots in the camera store, and I just couldn't get a decent image. I saw also like a thread. Someone was asking about like the FD, like an FD 17 millimeter or something. No way, man. Like, no way. Super wide like that on FD is gonna suck pretty hard. Any of the wides that I used, that was like the 24 millimeter FD was okay, and the 28 was actually better than the 24, but the 20 is awful. It's straight awful. For vintage lenses, the better ones that I've used are always on the longer side, like between 50 and, like the ones that I've used, 50 to 200. Those are like okay, and you're still going to want to stop it down to like an F4 at least. But the for older glass, like once you start kind of coming into the wider range, they just suck. Like especially when you look at the edges on any of that ultra wide glass from FD is just awful. The width of the focus ring, not the circumference. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And that's where like some people get into trouble and they complain that their follow focus doesn't work properly. I've seen it like in threads, and they'll complain because it's just not working. And it's like, look how, I don't know if this is going to be so obvious, but if you look at how thin this focus ring is, it's like, you know, like less than an inch, I guess. You know, it's so small that even if you get one of those zip ties, it'll probably get stuck on something. And I've seen it where people try to use really thin gears on them. It just doesn't work. Your best bet is to just get a lens that has a wider band. The focus ring needs to essentially be wide enough so that it will work. Um, yeah. What did I have for today? Yeah. The I'll talk about one of the shows that I've been watching. So, um, I have been avoiding a show called Cobra Kai for the longest time. The reason why I've been avoiding it is because probably, like, if I had to tell you my top, two movies when I was a kid, it was Braveheart came later. That's one of my, if I was to do a top 10 of all time, Braveheart's in there. And it's the one I think about. But if I was to think about, like, when I was a kid, one of my favorite movies, um, several of them would be like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. Um, the Last Starfighter is one of my favorite movies of all time. But The Karate Kid was one of my favorite films. And the reason that I like it so much, or at least I liked it so much, was because like as a kid, I was one of those kids that would get bullied. So seeing Daniel LaRusso kind of go through his karate training and learning to have more confidence in himself, being less reckless, like controlling himself, all those things. I mean, for me, it was really important. Like those kinds of coming of age movies, I think that everybody has like at least one or two movies that they really see themselves as like that character. And it actually got my brother and I to enroll in karate when we were younger. So like Daniel LaRusso is a character that's very, very close to me as a human being. Like he's like one of my heroes. If I think of my top heroes, he's up there. And so seeing it as an adult, I've seen the movie I don't know how many times. I don't know, maybe 15 times. Even as an adult, when you watch it, not only is it, I think, really engaging for younger kids because they go through, like a lot of kids go through very similar things that Daniel goes through, but as far as the storytelling aspects, there's a lot of really raw, well-directed moments in that film. And it's without that, like Ralph Macchio, he does a really good job in that movie. Like it's undeniable how well he plays that character, especially like when he's trying to talk with his mother and he kind of keeps avoiding talking about getting bullied and getting beat up and all those things because you feel shame as a kid. So, seeing him kind of go through everything, and what I'm trying to say is that it's really hard for me as an adult. I'm much older now, but seeing like that there's a show where the main character or like the protagonist is going to be the guy I hated as a kid, that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough for me to do. And the way that some people had told me it, they said, "Oh yeah, it's like the Karate Kid except for this time Daniel's a bad guy." And I was like, "No, I don't want to watch that." I kept saying like I don't want to watch my hero like being an asshole. I don't want to watch that. So What's interesting is that that's not really the show at all. And I eventually watched it because my wife wanted to watch it pretty bad, and so we started watching it. And really, like, Johnny Lawrence is an anti-hero. He should be in jail with the things that he does. But Daniel LaRusso is just like kind of like a normal guy, that's trying to deal with things as an adult. So it's the show's actually really good. I've been binging it. We're at like episode 10 in season 2, and it's actually really good, for the most part. There's only a few complaints that I have about it. Those complaints have to do with some of the writing, because it's specifically how they write some of the characters. I get really irritated when I see the same drama over and over and over again. When, like, you have high school kids, and in the first season, things kind of like made a bit more sense to me and felt a little bit more natural. But when it starts to get really artificial and like Melrose Placey, or I don't know what you would call it now. I don't know what soaps or similar kinds of things are there now. But when you have it where you're trying to manufacture love triangles between people and all this kinds of ridiculous stuff, it really kind of annoys me. Because it's very predictable. So, if I had one gripe about it, it would be that there are tons of things that teenagers go through that don't have to be these really dumb love triangles between characters like that, and you don't have to make them so predictable. And especially with how they write women, what's annoying is how a lot of times the conflicts between main female characters end up where it's over a dude. I would just ask, watch some more stuff that's written by some other people, to find ways to have women kind of, be, fighting for something that doesn't necessarily have to be a dude. That's all I'm asking. There's a lot of really great examples of shows that have this. They're not all like, something like Cobra Kai. There's 30 Rock has all kinds of conflict between characters that doesn't have to do with relationships like that. There's what was it? Marvelous Ms. Maisel. There's all kinds of stuff where in hers it's more of a conflict in of herself and her family and what she wants to do with her life. There's tons of examples of ways that you can write characters, but sometimes you just need to reach out from your own mind and like talk to other people to try to write that stuff better. That's my big complaint about it. But overall, it's very, very good, very engaging. Ralph Macchio's, actually, he gets better as the series goes. He kind of like starts off a little rough, in my opinion, but then gets a lot better. I'm actually really, the most surprising thing, let me just look it up real quick. William Zabka, he's the guy who plays Johnny Lawrence. Man, he should be in more stuff. He should be in more stuff. I am just surprised at how good he is in this show. I wouldn't have expected it. I can't name another thing that he was in, other than anything to do with Karate Kid stuff. So, I guess as actor, martial artist, screenwriter, director, and producer. Best known for roles in Karate Kid and Karate Kid Part 2 and in Cobra Kai. So it's like, I don't know where he's been. I don't know where that guy's been, but he needs to be in more work. He really does. I think he's great. I think he's great. So I don't want to give away too much of the show because I think you should watch it if you liked Karate Kid at all. But that's the other thing I wanted to point out about it is my wife had asked me, she said, I like this show, but do you think that this would have been possible to do without the previous, without the movies? And I said, absolutely not. They keep referencing, like the first season, they just keep referencing the movies. They have to. So, no, I don't think it would exist without them, but I still think it's pretty good. I was surprised at how good it was. So, um, hey DJ, how you doing? Good to see you. Have I watched the OA? No, I have not. I think I was asked about that. Let me just see real quick. Science fiction, supernatural, fantasy elements. No, I have not seen the OA. Oh, the real reason Netflix canceled the OA. I guess it was canceled at some point. Um, no, I have not. I have not seen this. I'll have to. Let's see here. American mystery drama web television series with science fiction, supernatural, and fantasy elements. Um, I'm trying to see if there's Marling stars a young woman named Prairie Johnson, who resurfaces after having been missing for 7 years. Oh, it's one of those. Prairie now calls herself the OA and can see despite having been blind before her disappearance. Okay. Hmm. I don't know. The exhibit scars on her back and can see. I'm sorry, but the setup for this looks very common. Like I've seen this setup done many times over. I'm a little. Mm, I'm skeptical that I'd like it, just because it looks like something I've seen before. Uh, Tony wouldn't like it. You think? Yeah, but I don't think I would. It doesn't look very original. Um, it's the people that made Another Earth. I haven't seen that either. Let me see what Another Earth is. Another Earth. Oh, it's a movie. Let's see here. Night Discovery. On the night of the discovery of a duplicate Earth in the solar system, an ambitious young student and an accomplished composer cross paths in a tragic accident. Okay. Yeah. I won't read the whole storyline. Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen that. First season, 11 out of 10. Second season, 6 out of 10. It isn't a traditional story in your opinion, but I don't think you'd like it. Um, yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean it's not good. I just, you know, there's some things I like and some things I don't like. It's not something that I would put high on my list after looking at the description. Um, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll have to do that another time. I just thought like I had seen on a Facebook group that I follow, there was someone who put together like I guess it was everybody in their class, I guess, worked together on a sheet that was like all the movies that you had to have seen before going into film school, and The Raid wasn't on there. I don't get that. But yeah, I kind of I think I'm gonna put together a list of all the movies, let's say 50 films that I think you should see before going to film school. That'll probably be enough. But the fact that The Raid wasn't on a list of 100 is that's a crime. Um, yeah, it's one cheap Eric says, yeah, it's much different from its tagline, no pressure. It's fantasy in suburbia, which I thought was really cool. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind giving something a chance. You know, Dark was something that I had to give a chance, and I got hooked on it. So we'll see. There's a lot of shows recently that have been following, and you know, I'm sure that some people who might be critics will say that I'm kind of giving it too much credit, but um, oh, what's the name of the show? Oh my God, it's slipping my mind right now. Stranger Things. So, like, since Stranger Things, which starts out very simply, kid goes missing, there's a bunch of shows that's kid goes missing and then weird things happen. So like when I see that as like the first part, I go, oh, okay, I think I've seen this before. Um, so I mean, it's not always that case, but sometimes it does. Once Upon a Time in the West. I don't remember if I'd seen that or not. Once Upon 68. I think I've seen this. Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah, Sergio Leone. I've seen everything by Sergio Leone at least once. Yeah, stuff from Sergio Leone is like most of that stuff is really good. But I would say you got to watch like probably just one of his to kind of get what was going on. But yeah, anything with Daniel Day Lewis. Well, Daniel Day Lewis is in what's that one with Chris Farley where they're going to the West. Oh my God, I think it's Almost Heroes. It's I think it's Chris Farley's last movie. You don't have to see that. That's got Daniel Day Lewis in it. Yeah, Daniel Day Lewis is really good. His way of acting is really interesting. He, I guess, can be a real jerk because he does a lot of method acting. Um, but he plays jerks really, really well. I like him in uh, Gangs of New York. There's several lines that he delivers. It's just like with such hatred and disdain. It's like he just plays it perfectly. Um, yeah, there's like if I was to do a list of movies that you should see before going into film school, like a lot of them people would arch their eyebrow because I think that it's not only good to study your classics and when movies are done like perfectly, but there's also several other genres or styles that a lot of people have no idea really exist, and you only find it out when you're older. For me, you know, I feel like you need to watch at least one movie from each genre, even if they're like kind of these weird fringy things, in order to really understand uh, what artists that are in that world are even trying to do. So, something wild. I don't think I've seen that. No, I don't think I've seen that. It's got Jeff Daniels in it, so I'd probably see it. Yeah, I'd have to see it. It was screened out of competition at Cannes. Yeah, I'd have to see that. Yeah. So, like, I think I'm not sure if this would be the movie, but I really feel like people need to see movies like, like The Room or Samurai Cop or Hard Ticket to Hawaii or like some of these just B films that are not successful, they're not really well made, um, and it really kind of changes your perspective as a filmmaker when you see stuff like that's really bad but you see that it has a cult following. If you're trying to learn the art of filmmaking, you really have to understand why that occurs. And one of the important things is that just because you can get a movie to like a movie house to play it, or you can get a movie to like play on Amazon or on Netflix, it doesn't necessarily mean you made this like incredible thing. Sometimes it's a total failure, but people like it anyway. Even acknowledging that is pretty good. I think also low budget filmmaking, like, and I think I've talked about it before, but a movie like Manborg would probably be in like at least the top 100 because it it for what it is and the kind of money that they had to back it and what they had to work with, it's just an enjoyable film. And to know the difference between something that's enjoyable and something that was like what you could do, and something where you have like $1 billion to put toward the budget and can make whatever you want. Like there's a pretty big difference. I don't like Clerks, to be honest. I don't like Clerks at all. Um, I did not find it very fun to watch. But that was a while ago. Sometimes you gotta watch movies later too. That's another thing too, is seeing movies like, you know, if you can remember how a movie made you feel as a kid, and then when you're in like an adolescent, and then when you're older, like movies can really change. One movie that I would strongly recommend everybody watch is All Dogs Go to Heaven, because when you have to understand that a movie like that, what kids see, like what kids see in that kind of movie, and then what adults see can be totally different things. And knowing the kind of storytelling that's going on and the look of it and the juxtaposition to the story, which is horrific, understanding that is like even people who go through film school and spend years, they don't really understand how that kind of art can even come to be. Like that movie's, you could do a whole paper on that movie. Um, there's very adult themes in it that you do not see as a child. You just don't see it. Um, Don Bluth stuff is just full of stuff like that. Um, yeah, so let's look at. I'm gonna look at some comments that I received the past week, and maybe we can get some questions in there. Had someone look at the. It's weird. Like some of my videos are getting looks now. I guess people are sharing them, but some people using the color space transform node in the RE C LUT. Um, the interesting thing is that like if you use that technique, if you haven't seen that video and you want me to link it, let me know. But basically, what I'm noticing when it comes to skin tones and when people talk about it, a lot of times like people think it's colors and it's not colors. The tone is more of like how those midtones are mapped in their luma values more than it is the color values that people really see the difference. And I think that's what's been going on and why people kind of didn't like a lot of the stuff that was coming out of like the Pocket 4K and some of the stuff out of the Pocket 6K, because people didn't really understand how to grade the footage and how to get a better, um, uh, basically better tonalities out of those midtones to make it where, you know, highlights like parts that were just, you know, slightly moving into the highlights, if you didn't use any kind of color space transform to get it into more of a log looking curve, skin tones would get really hot. And I showed that in one of my videos, well, the video that goes over Gen 5. I showed how just adding a little bit of contrast in Gen 4, you got really hot skin. Whereas with Gen 5, you could add a lot more contrast without the skin looking like it was getting pushed into the highlights. So, you know, that's what's really interesting about all this that I'm finding out. People are thinking that it's color and it's not. It's just, you know, how those midtones are mapped. Um, Someone had said when they tried to match the Blackmagic cinema camera with the Pocket 4K in the awkward scenarios where you had like reds that were getting pushed too far with the Pocket 4K, they would like go into Gen 1. I tried that, like going into Gen 1 color space with the Pocket 4K, and I never really got like really good colors out of that. So it's interesting that they did that, but they had admitted that Gen 5 looks like it'd be a lot easier, and I agree with that. Gen 5 will make it easier to match stuff like that. Um, let's see. Uh, I'm not going to go over that one. Um, yeah. So this concerns me. So somebody had said, "Thank you." This was in response to my Blackmagic Pocket 4K SSD connectivity workaround where you basically have to turn on the camera, then plug in your drive. And they said, thank you, Tony. I'm just setting up my new Blackmagic and T5 and learning as I go, aka know nothing of what I'm doing. If it wasn't for this vid and the internet, I would be in panic mode. Here's the thing. That problem has been solved with a firmware update. So let me just make sure that everybody who watches this understands this. Anytime you get a new camera, anytime, it doesn't matter what brand, whatever, okay? Even if you get a new lens, okay? The first thing that you should be doing is checking to see if there's a firmware update. Because if you don't do that, you're going to end up with situations like this person. Because they didn't go through, and I'm not like, trying to bag on them for not knowing this, but if you don't know, you need to understand that when you have software in your stuff, there is most likely going to be, even if you get like one of the first or maybe the second batch of cameras or lenses, there's probably going to be a firmware update, because once people get the thing in their hands, they're going to find problems. It's just inevitable with how technology works now. So, like I said, anytime you get a device, check for updates. Number one, if this person had done that, he wouldn't have had any issues with his T5. It would have worked properly right out the gate. I haven't had any issues with my Samsung T5 SSD since doing the update that fixed it on the Pocket 4K. Random question, do you know how the auto match works with the color checker? I actually like the look of it better than what I get to manually. If you're talking about using the color checker in DaVinci Resolve, where you basically line it up to your, if you have like, just get one. So if you've got like your, let me just check that I can actually see this. Yeah, if you've got like your color checker, right? And if you're talking about lining up the auto color checker in DaVinci Resolve to make sure that this is all being analyzed and you get the proper, you're supposed to get the proper contrast and the proper colors all aligned. I know how to use it. It's just that when you shoot it, it has to be done right too, because the highly reflective stuff needs to be angled in the proper way to not make it get screwed up. And then the options in it can sometimes, depending on your camera, like you have to have the right options selectable down there. I always do everything through red, wide gamut RGB, and Log3G10, so I just use that and it works fine. So, I mean, you can get there manually, and the color checker should help to get, it definitely helps if the skin tones are like quite a bit off. I've found that, doing that, you can actually, if you want one cheap Eric, the really good thing that you can do is create a LUT that has those fixes done for you in your normal shooting situation, so that your LUT in camera can do it, and then later it can be really easy to just throw the LUT on if you get the same look every single time. That way you don't have to go through the whole, process of doing it. But that's just if you're trying to, save yourself some time. That when you do that, the corrections that are being done should get it to where all the colors are mathematically accurate. But a lot of times the weird thing is that like people don't like things that are mathematically accurate most of the time, which is why like Sony colors people hate, because even when it's mathematically accurate, they think it's bad. Let's see here. Just going through to see if there's anything in here. Yeah, on the Facebook group, there's a comment here on the Facebook group. If you haven't joined the Facebook group, let me know, and I can send the link to it. I can now approve people. It wasn't working last time. But we do need on that group more discussion. One of the things I've found is really kind of difficult is getting people to feel comfortable talking. And I've always been that person like in school that didn't have any qualms with just raising my hand and asking a question if I didn't know something, or like stating an opinion. In our Facebook group, it's not going to be the kind of group where people are going to ridicule each other just for having an opinion. So, if you want to talk about filmmaking, you want to talk about video production, you want to talk about whatever, let us know, and I can get you in the group. So let me just shoot down the link so you guys can get in. So I can give you the link to the group. So that's the link to the group. And please join us. That's a really good idea. My wife makes me tear down most every time one-bedroom apartments, so my look changes frequently. Yeah, that's pretty difficult. When I get a basement studio, though, for sure. Yeah. The thing is that One Cheap Eric, if you use the same lenses, you're using the same lights. Especially if you're shooting in a room where you've controlled the lights, so you're not getting like a lot of window light. If you're in a room where you can't control the window light, depending on the time of the day, it'll be different. And then time of the day, and then time of year, it'll be you'll have either more blue or more orange light, but you'll at least get it where the colors are pretty much where they're supposed to be with that LUT, and then you can adjust your white balance as appropriate, and it should correct any further issues. So it's just one way to kind of cut that corner, so you don't have to line it up and do it every time. But if you have time, just you can do it manually each time with no problem. Okay. Yeah, so there was a comment on the video that I made for the Ursa 12K that I'll talk about. They said, let's see here. They said, I don't think this camera will sell very well. High-end cinema is built around economies of scale. They use super expensive stuff so they can charge more to justify higher costs in some regards. I don't really agree with that. That said, in this present crazy world, who knows, they may very well use it. BMD, however, have a reputation of the gear not being reliable, at least in my experience. ARRI and Red are tanks and take a beating from all I've been, Panasonic as well. Maybe all I've seen. All that I said could very well go through the window. Thing is, they are trying to break into the purist market. Tough nut to crack. Let's wait and see. Other than those guys, it's the nutcase enthusiasts who have cash to splash but don't actually need 12K. Then again, other than CGI VFX, who actually needs 12K? So, this is an interesting set of comments. There's a lot of arguments being made here, so I'll try to talk about it. I don't think it will sell very well. Well, it depends, because if the point of the camera is what I think it is, which is more of a statement, it's like, hey, look, we can make this really awesome thing. We have a sensor design. It's in a camera. It can go up to 12K. It looks awesome. That kind of thing. It may be for a number of things. It could be that this is their marketing piece. They say, look, we've got this super high-end kind of product that we're creating, and then the technology from that, you would imagine as a consumer, trickles down into their other devices. So it may be that this camera does not have to sell well. It may be that that's not the point of it. It could be that only very few people need to buy it in order for them to justify the expense of it, because they will then use the same or similar technology into the rest of their devices. So I don't know. Maybe it doesn't really matter if it sells well. I don't know everything. But I mean, that's what I would imagine. I mean, the camera doesn't hit the same, consumers that their other cameras seem to hit. Although I've seen that people who own the other Ursa Minis are looking at buying this 12K camera. High-end cinema is built around economies of scale. Well, just to economy of scale, a proportionate saving in costs gained by an increased level of production. In microeconomics, economies of scale are the cost advantages that enterprises obtain due to their scale of operation, with cost per unit of output decreasing with increasing scale. Well, I mean, assuming that that's what you're talking about as far as economies of scale, high-end cinema uses whatever they need to in order to get a job done. The reason why a lot of larger production companies are using more expensive stuff is because they're usually built to a higher degree of, let's just say, perfection in a lot of ways. And they usually have the kinds of inputs and outputs that you need for something that's more high end. There's a good reason why, a Fuji X-T4 isn't being used to shoot the next big Netflix original as far as its A camera. There's a lot of reasons for that. They use super expensive stuff so they can charge more to justify higher costs in some regards. It just doesn't make sense to me. The expensive stuff is there not just because it's more expensive and they can justify, charging more. That's not really how it works. The cost of, if it's a high-end production, of course, I'm assuming that this person is talking about something like, either a very high-end show where you're talking about millions of dollars being spent per episode, or if you're talking about something like, Mandalorian is a high-end kind of show, right? And then if you're shooting something like the next Marvel movie, well, the cost of the cameras and the lenses and all that is not really that much compared to all of the work and labor that they're going to be paying for when it comes to visual effects. So it just dwarfs the cost of like a camera. It just completely dwarfs that. So I don't really agree with this. The camera cost is not really going to be the thing that makes people go, "Oh my God, like this must be a great thing because the camera's so expensive." It's not really how it works. This is not a good argument, just in my opinion. Maybe if you owned a studio and you wanted to just buy like a $50,000 camera because you wanted to charge more for doing something, I guess you could be someone who does that. But do studios that have like millions and millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on one movie, are they going to try to justify the higher cost by spending, 10,000 more dollars on a camera? No, not really. BMD have a reputation of the gear not being reliable. Depends. I know some of it is maybe less reliable than others, but I don't know. My experience so far with Blackmagic Design products is that they work. So I don't know. It could be that with like Aris and Reds, there's more attention paid to make sure that the parts used are of a higher quality. That could be a situation, or that it's goes through more rigorous QA. One of the things I say is that when it comes to production, and you've got like two things that both can do the same thing, that there's always, and one of them is $10,000, one of them is $5,000. Well, the $5,000 one is cutting corners somewhere. There's somewhere that they're saving money. Sometimes it's in marketing budgets. Sometimes it's in parts. Sometimes it's just that they have access to something that the other company doesn't. But a lot of times when it's cameras like this, and usually it's not a difference between 10 and 5,000, it's like 30,000 and 6,000. Well, there's got to be cost cutting somewhere. If it's in QA, that's usually the case. When it comes to lenses, it's usually QA. The quality assurance and the sample variation, if you were to compare like Canon brand L glass, and then you compared that to like Viltrox, you're going to see a pretty huge difference between sample variations. The Canon actually has a really good reputation of getting pretty much the similar copies throughout the line now. Back in the day, it wasn't like that. But with, a company like Viltrox, or, a low end, let's say it's like, the consumer level stuff, the consumer level lenses versus a professional line of lenses, you can expect that the sample variation is going to be much higher in the consumer level than the professional level. So photographic elements. A lot of studios rent the best cameras instead of buying it. Yeah, most do. The cameras that usually are owned by directors of photography are going to be like less expensive. They're not going to usually be the really, really expensive stuff. They're usually going to be much less expensive cameras. Usually. Same thing with lenses too. Like I see that with, it'd be like, well, this is why I say to not really purchase like a set of lenses. If you're like, oh, well, I want to shoot a movie, so I'm going to go buy a whole set of lenses that are going to be like $10,000. I say don't do that, because there's not really like, you're not going to get much utility out of buying it. Why don't you just rent it? And then that way, like, you do just like what directors of photography generally do, where if depending on what you're shooting, you pick a certain line of lenses. Not all of them do that, but a lot of them do. If your whole thing is, I'm going to buy vintage glass because vintage glass looks better to you and it looks more vintagey for whatever reason, well, that's not going to fit every production. There's no way that it's going to fit every production, because the look of it's going to be totally different from one thing to the next. And everything that you pick should reflect what the purpose of your art is supposed to be, like what you're trying to say with your choices. I gave a critique recently on a video where the person was this video, and the whole video was just like on a gimbal or something, or handheld, and I didn't understand the purpose of doing it all in one shot. And it's actually a pet peeve of mine where I see like when it looks like someone's just showing off something, and they're saying this, they're not saying like, this is me experimenting with doing this. They say, this is my piece that I did. I go, well, what's the purpose of doing something all in one shot when there's nothing really that amazing about it? You could have probably made something more interesting had you given yourself a chance to do more compositions that made more sense to the piece, and allowed you to cut. Because in production, in video and in cinema, it doesn't matter what you're making. If it's a movie, the sequence and the way the sequence is played out and editing is how you tell your story usually, and the way you shoot needs to be in effort to help tell that story. If all you're doing is picking a camera or picking a lens or picking, I'm going to do it all in one shot on a gimbal because I just feel like doing it that way, that's not enough of a reason to do that. So anyway, so what's the next thing? Ari and Red are tanks and take a beating from all I've been. I don't know about Red, but I know Ari's do. Ari's are very robust cameras. I haven't used Reds in that kind of situation. When I did use it, we babied it. So I don't know. Panasonic's, I've never had a problem with Panasonic. Canon as well. Like, that's the thing that people don't understand sometimes, when Canon cine cameras are kind of badmouthed quite frequently by people who are, it's usually people who are like zealots for a brand. They'll kind of crap on Canon because they don't have the kinds of codecs that I want or a lot of other people want. But the thing about them is that they work. I've never had a Canon cinema camera not work. Never. And I've used them for years. And that's what's so great about them. The same thing with Panasonic cameras. I've never had it where they just don't turn on or they don't work or anything like that. With stills stuff, like with the Fuji cameras, I've had it where, and of course they're not cinema cameras, but I've had it where they don't work, they don't turn on, don't operate the way that they should. I've had that happen with a couple Sony cameras where they just wouldn't work right and we had to replace them. But Canon never had a problem. Never had a problem. So I can understand that argument. Things they're trying to break into the purist market. I don't agree with this purist idea, because a lot of times the cinematographers, at least that I'm familiar with, are pretty rational in their thinking and why they do the things that they do. Um, generally, generally they pick what's going to work for their project. The reason why they'll pick a certain lens is because it works for what they're doing, and they will shoot it in the way that they want to shoot it because it fits the feel that they're going for, or that the camera has the things that they want. It has the look that they want, or whatever it is. And sometimes those are intangible. I can't say if that's like a purist thing. If a lot of times the cinematographers that make the most sense are going to do side-by-side comparisons and say which they like better. If they do it blind, that's even better. So, I'm not sure if it's like a purist thing. I don't really agree with that. So most of the cinematographers I'm familiar with, it's not a purist thing. They don't pick certain cameras like Blackmagic design cameras because those cameras do not have certain things that they need, or that they want. So, and as far as who needs 12K, I don't know. And that's part of what I said in that video, was that if the camera is able to do what they say, where they can shoot in many different resolutions without cropping, and you can still get raw codec out of it, that will be, and if it looks good, if it's like artifact free, that will be incredible. So, as far as recording 12K, I can't say whether or not I would ever really need that. Maybe before I die, there will be something that is like in 8K that is the norm, I guess. But by then we'll have cameras that probably do that like on a cell phone, But my opinion on this is that when you've got a camera that the manufacturer is claiming can do all of these other things, if the camera is able to shoot, say, 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K, and 12K without cropping the sensor, and you can get it in very high frame rates and you don't have artifacts, dude, there's no other camera that can do that and shoot like raw. Every other camera I'm aware of that does that, if it's going from like a very high amount of pixels to going to, say, 4K, if you're going from like a 12K sensor to 4K, you have to downsample that in camera. And depending on how they do that, you're either going to have artifacts or you won't, but you'll never have raw out of it. It doesn't, like, raw doesn't really work like that. But if you're able to pull raw, if you're able to pull raw, or at least the Blackmagic raw codec, at like, say, 4K or 6K on this 12K camera without having the issues that you usually get with like line skipping and all that, dude, like, the camera will make sense. It means that you'll be able to use the camera in multiple scenarios. You won't have to use, the 12K camera specifically for doing your visual effects portion. You can use it in every other aspect of your filmmaking. So that's how I see it. And I can imagine that nature, like if you're shooting nature, as long as if this 12K Blackmagic design camera can actually like survive in pretty harsh conditions and packed around, dude, I don't see why nature shooters couldn't use something like this. I mean, I guess the big problem with it would be making sure you have enough drive space and have enough memory. But dude, like, if you're shooting nature, you often have to get really far away and you're using long lenses. So the fact that you can punch in even further and get like really, really close detail, that would be awesome. So I could totally see them being used in a number of ways. It just depends on, I think it's more like your imagination. What do you think you could use it for, and how relevant is it going to be in the future or right now? Right now with COVID, I guess it's not really relevant, but Photographic elements, lenses, and camera that best serve the story. That's right. That's again why I say like it's not really a good idea to go in and invest in a whole line of lenses that you're probably going to use on like one production that will fit that one kind of production. It's probably a good idea to get lenses you can use across multiple things. And you know, when you get a feature or you get a short where you want to use lenses that do a very specific thing, you go borrow those for a certain period of time and you bill that to the production. You don't bill it to yourself. One Cheap Eric, he has a Hideaway, best one shot gimbal video of all time, partial to great dance moves. I'd have to see that. Best shot gimbal video. Yeah, I'd have to see that. Hey Steve, good to see you. I can't believe you're here. Usually you can't make it because of the time difference. Good to see you. I think this person, there's another person who deleted their comment because I really did want to talk about this. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's this one. This was on the Pocket 4K Blackmagic RAW ending the ISO 1000 v100 debate. They said that was a good lesson. Now that I know, I feel like I haven't thought about it before. I have one question though, and I'd be super grateful if you'd explain what happens differently when you change from 400 ISO 400 to ISO 1250. So the difference between on the Pocket 4K, and I believe it's the same on the Pocket 6K. I haven't used it, but I believe it does the exact same thing, the same ISO ranges. I believe. I don't remember now because I haven't touched the Pocket 6K and it's been a while since I looked at it. But you basically have two gain settings. You have a low gain and a high gain. If you've ever used like a broadcast camera or like a number of other video cameras, you probably have seen those gain switches where it has like maybe 2 or 3 different gains, low, mid, and high, or low and high. So basically this is a similar thing where there's the difference is that in the low gain, which is between ISO 100 and 1000, really all that's going on there is you've got really one set gain, okay? And when you're taking images with it, the raw image that you're taking within that gain setting, there's no difference as long as you're shooting raw between 100 and 1000 as far as what's captured. The gain, the ISO 100 through 1000, all it's going to do is add a gain to make a different curve. And that is applied through metadata and through your NLE or through DaVinci Resolve, for example. So that's all that's going on. That's why there's no difference between your highlights when you shoot 100 to 1000 ISO using Blackmagic RAW. There's no difference. The data is all the same. You're not going to have any better or worse highlight information. You're not going to have any better or worse shadow information because it's all the same, okay? And the only difference, what I'm telling you is that the only difference is that the gain that's being added in post is either going to be positive or negative from that base ISO, okay? When you go from 400 to 1250, once you hit 1250, it bumps into that new gain. You got to think of it being like a difference between digital switches and analog switches. So between 100 and 1000, it's all digital. It's all being done in post. It's after the image has been captured that any difference is happening between 100 and 1000 at all. But when you go into 1250, there's an analog. There's a physical change that's happening. And it's using a different gain circuit to get into basically parts of the sensor that are attuned to that higher energy level. That higher, maybe that's the wrong term, but it's that higher gain setting. It's attuned differently. One's for the lower end, one's for the higher end. So when in ISO 100 through 1000, it's attuned for having more light in the scene. And then when you get into 1250 through 6400, that's attuned for having less light. So all that really is happening is that your when the sensor is essentially being attuned differently in those different gain settings, you're going to be clipping off highlights in the high gain, but what you get is less noise in the shadows. But the same thing applies for 1250 to 6400. There's not going to be any difference in the recorded data other than metadata between 1250 and 6400. If you shoot at 6400 and something's blown out, it'll be blown out at 1250. There's no difference between them because it operates the same way. It's just attuned differently. Okay? And this basically has to do with ISO invariance. And when your sensor is invariant, it's usually during certain settings. Like you'll notice this if you've ever been to photons to photos. Photons to photos. Let's see here. I'm going to try to get this so that you guys can see. Let's see, we'll go. Let's see, Fuji X Pro 3 and Hasselblad X1D. Okay. No, we'll pick a Sony. Sony's better. Sony A7 Mark III. Okay. Hasselblad. I'll send this to you guys. Okay. So if you go there, and you can pick different cameras, but the ISO invariance, from my understanding, and how a lot of this works is that there's like these big steps and jumps in how you can see like dynamic range change depending on the ISO you pick. And once there's a spike, that's when analog gain is being applied in some way. That's how I understand it reading the charts. And you can see it most obviously with like the Pocket 4K or the Pocket 6K, in that there's really the two gain settings. There's really, you have your dynamic range goes down and then all of a sudden it goes like this at a certain point because you're actually able to, see something different occurring with it. It's like a pretty drastic difference between 1250 and 1000. It will look completely different. And in photons to photos, when you look at how they look at dynamic range, you should be able to tell which areas or which like ranges of that sensor look like they're ISO invariant and which ones are not. So by ISO invariance, just so you understand what I'm talking about, is how there's a difference between how ISO, having an analog gain, just like what we talked about with the low and high gain with the Pocket 4K. Basically, there's ranges where the ISO doesn't really bake anything into the image. It's all done in post, either increasing or decreasing exposure in a raw file. So I hope that makes sense. I don't know how well I did explaining that. But if you look at something like, let's see here. Yeah. Again, if you're looking at photons to photos, I wish I could just do a screen share, but let me see if I can do that. Uh-oh. Oh no. Did I just ruin my stream? Hold on, guys. Give me a second. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm not going to play around with this. I think I know how to do it, but I'm not going to play around with it because I'll probably break something. But if you use the Photons to Photos website and you click on something like a Canon EOS 5DS or a 5DSR and you compare that to Sony A7 III, you'll see a very distinct difference in the way that ISO is calculated. So that should show you how there is a difference between like ISO invariant sensors and then something like the Canon sensors, which actually are applying analog gain at those different ISO settings. So those cameras will functionally capture RAW differently than something like a Pocket 4K or like an A7 Mark III. I hope that makes sense. It's not easy to talk about all this stuff, like especially when I'm doing it off the cuff and I don't have it written down. So yeah, okay. Oh yeah, so all right, this was another comment that I received. It was on my video where I talked about the red channel issue and a fix for the Pocket 4K. This was when I had first gotten it and I was trying to figure out what I was seeing. Excuse me, my goodness. I was trying to. This was one of the problems of having like gassed drinks is that you get gas. Anyway, so I'm not a radio talk show host, I guess. Anyway, so this video was talking about how there was a red channel issue, what I thought was a red channel issue with the Pocket 4K, and it ended up where it seemed like it was just colors that go out of gamut. That was the conclusion. So yeah, anyway, that was the conclusion, and this is a known problem. Okay, I'm not making up that the Pocket 4K or the 6K with the Gen 4 color science has issues with reds or blues or that kind of thing. And the video was an attempt on my part to kind of help people deal with that because I kept seeing problems in like red taillights and in stoplights and stuff like that. So somebody says, they said, yo bro, are you kidding? If so, haha funny. You're zooming in like 130% in absolute night scene and shitting over 3% of the frame, and I guess simple chroma noise reduction can fix this in DaVinci, and your solution is smart too. Okay, so anyway, first of all, no, I'm not kidding. When I have a product and I'm trying to make sure that that product is being delivered appropriately and that I don't have colors that look ugly and stab people in the eye, because that's the way that I see it. Like whenever I see stuff like that, I look right at it. And if I can see it in full screen, which I think I say in the video that I could see it full screen, I zoom in just because on YouTube you're not going to see the same things as I do because YouTube compresses the hell out of the images. So, it's not that I could only see it if I zoomed in to where it filled up the screen. It's that I did that so you guys looking at it can understand what I'm seeing and see it for yourself. So, and even if something takes up a smaller portion of the screen, if something is so distracting that a tiny portion of the screen is dominating what you're looking at, or the view of the person looking at the video or the footage or whatever it is, then you should probably fix it. Okay? And then the fact it's being absolute night has nothing to do with it. It's either correct or it's incorrect. And then crapping over 3% of the frame, I can't say that I was doing that. I was just saying it looked really ugly. And it's a fact. Like, that was some of the ugliest looking reds that I'd seen in a long time out of a camera. Usually colors like that can bleed, or they'll turn orange, or yellow and some other things, but they don't look like that. The kind of noise that was coming off was not normal. It's not the normal thing that I see ever. And then telling me that I should do a chroma noise reduction when I clearly show a better way to do it that doesn't require a noise reduction, because what you need to do is map the gamut correctly, because the natural way that Gen 4 does map the gamut, it does not go into Rec 709, right? I mean, you don't need to use noise reduction, and the chroma noise reduction is going to affect everything. So that's not a good solution. It's an error with the footage or the way that it's interpreted. It's actually an error with the way that the footage is interpreted. It's not something that needs to be that needs to go through noise reduction. So, I think that sometimes, if you're commenting on videos, especially if it's someone who clearly shows a way to fix something, maybe like think about what you're saying. Let's see here. If you see the highlights and just small blocks of shadow parts, you should use 1000. Oh yeah. So this ended up where I guess there was like a big hoopla in this little thread here. I don't think this person meant to be annoying, but anyway, I'll just read what they said. So this is also on the ISO 1100 debate video. I guess this usually when I see this, when I have multiple comments, someone must have shared it somewhere. So that must be because that video is kind of old. But anyway, he says this video is excellent, but I have some considerations. If you have a scene that has a lot of highlights and just small blacks and shadow parts, you should use 1000 because it's a simple way. The way that they wrote this is weird. You should use the 1000 because is way simple, correct this black shadow noise on post, then lose details on the highlights. I disagree because all you're doing is boosting the shadows and getting a bunch of noise in the shadows. The better way to deal with this when you have a scene with a lot of highlights and you have shadows that are dipping too low, basically you have too much contrast, is to actually reduce the dynamic range of the scene. That means that you use silks. If it's exterior, you use silks, you use lights, you use filters. I just saw a video recently that appeared on my feed that was like, an amazing way to add dynamic range to your camera, and it was basically just using a graduated ND filter. And I'm like, dude, that's a trick that's been used since like the early days of cinema. I think it's interesting that people are rediscovering things like that, because that is when you do that, when you use like a graduated ND filter, what you're doing is reducing the dynamic range of the scene to fit your camera so it doesn't look like things are blown out or that your shadows are going, dipping too far into the blacks. So, I mean, still, I don't agree with this because, 1000, I don't know if you guys have used 1000, but the shadows look terrible at that ISO. I wouldn't do that. I would crash the shadows before I brought it up to 1000. My opinion is that in the low gain, you stick to 400. Highest I'd go is like 640 or whatever. But, 400 already, like I make sure that the shadows are exposed right, or I expect to crash them because the noise for shadows there is not great. If you underexpose the sensor at 400, you've underexposed it at 1000. There's no real difference. And I found also that when you use 1000 in post, there's some really weird purple stuff that shows up in my footage that's not there in 400. So I wouldn't use ISO 1000 regardless. I would keep it at 400. Yes, all that compressed highlights on 100 and 400 can be recovered on post almost everything using log wheels, LR, HR tools, and the highlight recovery option on camera raw. You can decompress all that highlights and bring details back, but not completely, and it's a little more complex than correct the noise problem on shadows if you go to 1000. So depends of your scene. Will be better use the 1000 instead of 800, 400, 100, or whatever. Depends on the scene, what ISO you're going to use. Again, I just don't agree with all this because I've done the test myself, and 400's as high as I go in the low gain. If I have to go to 800, I'm going to go to the second gain setting and stop down because the noise levels in the shadows at those higher ISOs are not really good for me. I don't like to add a lot of noise reduction in post when I don't have to. And in the video, you can't really, there's no such thing really, in my opinion, as recovering exactly, because it's either there or it's not. So the major difference is that when you got highlights that are clipped, they're clipped. You don't recover that. they're gone. You can't recover what's not there, essentially. So all you're doing really is bringing your highlights down into basically Rec 709 levels so that you can see them. Okay. The only difference is that when you use that little tick box on the raw selections to use highlight recovery, that rebuilds highlights based on the other channels that didn't get clipped. My understanding of it. So that's the only way to really do that. So either it's there or it's not. You're either overexposing it or you're not overexposing it. So regardless of what this person's talking about, you either like the curves at these different ISOs or you don't. You can take the curves that are given to you at any of these ISO levels and adjust the highlights or the shadows however much you want, and it'll give you whatever it is that you want to have out of it. The whole point of the video is explaining that you're not going to get any more or less information by just changing ISO. So there's no real argument there on this. And again, in my opinion, if you're having to go into post and like raise shadows, if you ever have to do that, you're going to get noise. Okay, it's going to happen. I avoid that as much as possible. Okay, it just means that you've underexposed things. The better way to do it, my opinion, you actually change the lighting situation. You adjust the actual dynamic range in your shot to work for your camera. That's how you avoid clipped highlights. That's how you avoid shadows that are muddy and noisy and, have those purple issues. So, there was this whole argument, and, this other person had joined in and trying to explain that, if you expose to the right or whatever, however you want to expose, if you clip it, you clip it. There's just no difference. Okay. You can say using different ISOs is like a shortcut to doing certain things. That's fine. I mean, if you want to shoot at ISO 800 or 1000 because you like the way that curve works for your work better, who am I to tell you that you're wrong? You just go ahead and do that. But it doesn't invalidate anything in the video. And then they say, because I told them basically there's no difference. There's no difference in your actual exposure when you change ISO. It's only in the metadata. So then they say, well, what about using ProRes? There's no changes on post. And the thing is that this video that talks about, RAW, it specifically says on the title, Blackmagic RAW. It's about RAW or RAW codecs, and it's talking about between ISO 1000 and 100. And nowhere do I talk about ProRes because ProRes is a completely different animal. Anytime you're shooting in a compressed format, that's going to be something like 10-bit ProRes or 12-bit ProRes. I'm going to just adjust my focus here because I keep going out. There. Okay. So anyway, when you're doing like 10-bit ProRes or like 12-bit ProRes or whatever, like these are not RAW formats. Maybe ProRes RAW. I don't know about ProRes RAW and how that is recording information as far as like adding or removing gain and whether or not there's any difference between changing the ISO and post, because I haven't worked with ProRes RAW. But what I do know about Blackmagic RAW and Cinema DNG using the Pocket 4K, which the video specifically talks about, is that there's no real difference between them. As far as ProRes, there's absolutely a difference because it's baking in the curves. If you choose ISO 100 and you shoot ProRes, you're baking in that ISO 100 curve. If you're shooting at 1000 in ProRes, you're baking in that curve. Okay, so all of the talk about using different ISOs and changing that in post goes completely out the window because it's a totally different way of recording your information. So the video doesn't talk about that, and the thing is that I try to keep, like, if I make a video or if I have a discussion going on, if it's about RAW, I want to keep that discussion about that particular way of recording because that's what the video's about. There's tons of videos that talk about like ProRes or where places that you can go online to like learn about these other things, but I don't want to muddy the information on that resource with talking about things that are completely like, out of the realm. To me, ProRes, 10-bit ProRes out of the Pocket 4K, and Blackmagic Raw, they're just completely different animals. They're, in my opinion, they serve different purposes. ProRes works for certain things and is totally fine if you're getting most of what you want in camera the way you want it. And then Blackmagic Raw makes it where you can kind of sloppily shoot a lot of times and you don't have to worry about it so much. That's why I use it. So, I would not tell you to shoot the way I do, which is I don't even touch white balance when I don't even touch the white balance settings when I go and shoot somewhere. All I do is I'll leave it on the default, and I use a reference let if the client needs to look at it, then I have to actually I'll just quickly manually adjust the white balance to where it looks nice. But there's no reason for me to get it right on set because I'm just going to use my color checker anyway. So I can save time. And especially with the way that, with a lot of the stuff that I shoot where I'm going in different places and I'm shooting in mixed lighting situations, I don't want to have to keep checking the white balance and fix it like that. There's just no reason to do it, you know? So, I'm not going to tell someone to shoot that way if they're shooting ProRes though. It's a completely different scenario. In that case, if you're shooting ProRes, you got to white balance that correctly each time you change your lighting situation, because the more you stretch that 10-bit file, the worse it can get. And depending on the sensor, sensors are actually attuned for different degrees, different Kelvin degrees, I should say. And depending on, how much better your sensor is attuned for either tungsten light or for daylight, it'll be either better or worse depending on how far away you are from the actual white balance and where that attenuation is for the sensor. So I'm not going to say to do the same thing in ProRes as in RAW. It's just a completely different thing. And what's annoying is that this ended up where I kept trying to tell them that, they were telling me, what was the statement? They were like, did they edit it? I think they edited it. Let's see here. Public, this is what kind of annoyed me. They said, I never work with ProRes, but people do, and talking public, you need think on everyone. So I'm assuming that maybe English isn't their first language, but how I translated that was they're saying if you're going to, make a video that's public, you got to think about everybody. Well, the thing is that no, I don't. I don't have to think about everyone. My video is specifically targeted to specific people working with this specific camera with a very specific codec. So I don't actually have to think about everyone at all. It's not necessary. And I also said, if the public needs a video about that, then this isn't the video for it. That's all. It's pretty obvious to me. And then they got angry, and he says, "Dude, why the hell you still talking at all? I already said that it was a good video. Just chill. You said what you want in the video. I say what I want in the comment. That's it. Welcome to the internet. Deal with it." So this is where I say this, right? Why the hell am I talking? Because it's my video. And, it's a pretty backhanded compliment to say, hey, that was a good video, except for all these things. And when I try to discuss that with you, you get upset. So, the other thing about this is, this whole thing about you made the video, I say the comment, that's the internet, deal with it. Well, the thing is if that's how people are going to be, then they're not going to comment on my videos. Okay. And I told them that, but it's just I wanted to talk about this because it's kind of like one of those situations where I see things snowball out of control in these discussions, and I don't really understand. This is clearly just a situation where this person wanted to talk about something that the video is not about at all. And when they were told that that's not the point of this, they got upset or something, and then tried to tell me as the owner of the video I wasn't supposed to comment on my own video, which is really strange. So anyway, let's look in the chat. Interesting, the Fuji X-T3 is on the list, not the X-T4. It's probably they just didn't get it yet. One Cheap Eric says, I wouldn't worry about the trolls. I just delete mean comments. I equate it to dumping Kool-Aid all over my living room. um, they can they can do it, but no way I'm letting them stay in my house. Well, I think sometimes people, like, I give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, I assume that somebody isn't a troll before I just assume that they are. Mainly because I don't want somebody to try to communicate and then kind of mess up, only to be told, oh well, you're a troll and be banned forever. I think people deserve like a second chance if they're kind of being irrational and they're getting emotional for whatever reason. Like, I don't want to just ban them for that. Um, like, I just kind of like told him what time it was, and that if he wants to continue, being a part of the community that I'm trying to create on social media, then he needs to act accordingly. Nobody was swearing at him or being mean to him, so I'm not sure why they were acting that way. But I think that's just something that everybody can do. If Oh, welcome Waldo to the Facebook group. Um, so I just I don't want people to feel like they can't comment and say something that disagrees with me, because I'm totally fine with that. I like having discussions with people who disagree with me. Trust me, like um, people who know me personally know that I like to discuss politics and economics and stuff like that all the time, especially with people who do not agree with me. The thing is, though, when people start getting irrational and then they get all emotional about it, it can lead to problems. So, and I try not to get that way. But in situations like this, it's just like, I want them to feel like they can comment. I just want them to be, civil when they do it. Uh, Steve says, just curious about what type of client you tend to deal with, the job types you do. You mentioned you do some education. Is this doing bum and seat interview style? Do you do ad agency stuff? Okay, so the people that I work with are generally faculty, and that's either in the science community or it's in education. So basically, it's different because in the scientific community, a lot of times they want to talk about like their laboratories, what they're doing, what kind of research they're doing. The last one that I did at the near the beginning of COVID was for recruitment, and they were basically wanting to recruit uh, uh, more students into their lab to rotate with them. And there was like, I don't know, tons of scientists, and there was the video that we created was the only one that was of that kind of professional quality. And so and she got I think 10 8 between like 8 and 10 responses, and she kept like I think between 6 and 8 students, which was far more than everybody else. So it was a huge success as far as the outcomes. And I did get that video got rotated around to a lot of the labs, and the higher ups at that laboratory are talking about doing some more videos like that. So that's how you can kind of get into doing work like that. So with that kind of production, it's basically interview, depending on the kind of product it is. You either have them talking at the camera or you have them, doing the masked interview. That one, she was just talking directly to the camera because it was addressing people, addressing the students directly. So, and then a lot of the other stuff is just, B-roll. Most of it, in my experience, is like you need to get good B-roll and you need to have enough of it to cover the whole thing. And not only that, but the things that they say needs to be like actually interesting, and that's the harder part actually. Like getting cool looking B-roll is easy, but getting the person being interviewed to actually say things that are pertinent or that are relevant or that will grab attention can be very difficult. The other stuff that I do is most of the work that I do is in education. So there's a huge difference between the way that a promotional video, like, trying to get people to join a laboratory, trying to get people to buy a product, that kind of video serves a very particular purpose. It's trying to get people to do something for you, right? That's really what's going on. So advertisements, like the whole thing is like, was it the Mad Men thing where, oh, we have to sell you a story, and we sell you a narrative of what life would be like if you bought our thing. It's a completely different thing than, oh, look, I have this device. It does all these amazing things. Totally different thing, right? Car commercials are a good example of basically a narrative that just doesn't, like, it's not real life at all, but it makes you feel like you could be Matthew McConaughey driving around in a Lincoln or whatever. So, if you take a similar approach to the way that you can do these promotional videos for like science labs and stuff like that, you can actually get a really, really good product for them that's effective because you're using similar, you can use very similar techniques. The most important technique is that within the first 5 to 10 seconds, you have to do or say something that grabs the attention of the viewer so that they don't like disregard what you're saying. Some of the better ads that I've seen that are targeted toward men are what I see. It's bad because I know what the products are, but I can't remember like the name of the company, so maybe they're not that effective, but I remember them. They're like there's a guy who appears and he's like, those sunglasses you have are trash, and he just like rips them up. That within the first 5 seconds makes you go, what? Like, okay. And then there's another one where it's the same guy and he says like, he says something about, your nuts and how they're dirty, and it grabs your attention immediately. So, that's a situation that you can learn from that and go, okay, with these videos, I'll employ that same kind of thing. Within the first 5 to 10 seconds of this minute-long thing, I'll make sure to address like a very, very specific thing that will grab the attention of the target audience. I don't know why I started talking about that, but anyway. As far as doing ad agency stuff, I don't really do that anymore. So anyway, this is why, because with that kind of advertisement stuff or promotional kinds of videos, that is a very, very different thing to education. And even in education, it depends on like the specific kind of education you're doing and what you want to do. Selling your education technologies company to other people to buy your services, you need to have flashy marketing stuff, like your traditional ad stuff. Okay, so that's one thing. But what you actually need to do if you want to be effective at creating educational content is that you work toward you have to work with faculty, and you have to work with people who actually know how to teach, that can focus whatever content you're putting into the video in a way that lets them either pass the test or actually make sure that learning is taking place, which is very difficult to do with video because most of us are taught that having more music in it, more punchy stuff, more graphics, more information, basically making it look like a news set, that will make it look like that will get people to learn. Actually, a lot of that is distractions. So a big part of what I do is kind of towing the line between having good enough production value, using mainly like the narration of it. It's just right now with COVID, it's like all voiceover pretty much, and it's talking about like the course learning objectives and giving definitions for words and that kind of stuff. So I have to toe that line between giving relevant images that fit with what is being discussed and then adding text to help reinforce course learning objectives and that kind of thing. So it's two very different ways of doing it. And then the third thing is We're supposed to be doing a documentary for somebody, which we signed an NDA, but it's a documentary thing that I just can't talk about. So that's usually what I do. I think I made mention about peeps commenting on YouTube social media. Most don't want good quality debate views. Most come from not having the knowledge to participate in these quality talks. That's what's really difficult, Steve, is that, at least that I find, is that, at least in the United States, like a lot of times in public school, we're not really taught how to think critically. Even though I remember in some of our assignments there'd be like critical thinking, but really your job on those was to say what the teacher thought about something. So for example, like when I was in, and this was all like mainly in regular, what is it called? It's not just high school, but like your K-12 kind of education in the United States. I'm not sure what they call it like in Australia, but for K-12, which is kindergarten through 12th grade, if you read a book, most teachers wanted you to tell them what they told you the book was about. If you strayed from that, you would probably not do well on the test, even if you could argue your point pretty well and there weren't any like grammatical errors or anything like that. I tested that several times and the teachers failed miserably every single time I did it, and I had to threaten them with going to the principal with my paper in order for them to give me appropriate grades. So because they would say like they would say just I don't agree with your argument, and I go, dude, you can't give me a bad score because you don't agree with me. So that's the problem, is that if you train people to just regurgitate stuff instead of actually critically think for themselves and what they think something means, and to be able to back it with evidence, not just tell you what someone else told you it was because you assume that evidence exists for it, therefore you can just put it down as fact, but that people don't actually actively think about what they believe and how they believe it. If you believe that course A is the right course of action, well, you better have some kind of evidence for that, and if you use science as a backing, mathematics and science, and you have to actually prove things to be true. The more you get into that, the more you realize that every discussion really needs to have that, and a lot of people just don't. They're not equipped to do that. So at least that's what I see. And it wasn't, and a lot of times, like even in college, it wasn't better when it came to the arts. It was a lot of times very much like people just saying, "Oh, everything's fine." I said this to somebody on Facebook, like, because someone, after I'd given I thought a fair critique of a piece, where I give evidence and I give my opinions, and I say, you don't have to agree with my opinions. It's just, that's how I feel about it. And they said, oh, like, if I heard someone say this about my work, I would never want to, work again or whatever. And the thing is, like, if you're an artist, you have to be willing to hear other people's opinions. If you want to get better, like, if you intended one thing, but people weren't seeing it that way, I think it's better to know that and grow rather than everyone tell you everything's fine. And then later, you find out 10 years down the road, the reason why you're a failure is because you never grew as an artist. You couldn't get past your own head because you had a bunch of yes people around you. So, scientists here are paranoid about video. Is this something you see? What do you mean paranoid about it? I think that I talk. My wife is a scientist, right? She is a neuroscientist. And her way of looking at things is that, and I talk to her about it a lot, and it's that scientists need to get more into the sphere of social media and talking about their work, because we're actually, at least in the United States, we have a very anti-intellectual movement going on right now, where people are distrusting, there are pretty large groups of people who just distrust science. I mean, just look at how people respond to COVID. I mean, without knowing things are wrong, with, like, say, the science or whatever, they just make the assumption that science has got to be wrong about this. And what I think is that there's a very closed off, they call it like the ivory tower of the academia in the academic circles. And it's like this place where you live and, you're at the top and you look down on people. And it can't be like that. Like, we're all a society that requires everyone to be working together. And scientists need to be more open on how they do everything. I think that we could all do that. And I think scientists, if they did that, would see that people would trust them a hell of a lot more than they do right now. I'm not sure why scientists would be paranoid about that. I think people need to know how science is done. They need to know how the scientific method is being used, what's being worked on, how it's being worked on. And in my opinion, also, once you start learning how science is funded, you realize that there's a lot of things that need to change about that too. So, and that would actually help scientists in my view. If more people understood how science was done and how it was funded, that kind of stuff, like, they would actually be more on the scientist side about a lot of things. Have you seen more awareness to using video with COVID? Here, and I'm talking about Australia, there is a very big shift to video online streamed. Awareness to using video with COVID. The biggest change that I've seen with in regards to COVID is how so many things can be done digitally instead of having people actually have to go somewhere. So I'm not sure how that's going to affect like the tourism industry or even like, we were talking about scientists. There was a conference that was done completely digitally, and I don't see why that can't be done more often. Because that way, you're not spending as much money on fuel to fly people around the planet. You don't have to spend so much money on transportation and food and all those other things that it takes to get people from one place to a place where they like meet each other. I'm not saying that every conference should be like that. Okay, I'm not saying that we should completely get rid of things like that. However, I find it interesting that, especially for groups of people that might be getting, funding through public funds, maybe, you figure out a way to decrease the amount of money we spend on doing things like that and increase it on actually like their salaries, increase it on like students being paid more, or workers in science or workers in any field, actually they get the money from where it would go for these expensive conferences. So, again, I don't think they should all be replaced, but it's very interesting to see how people are seeing that they can have these same kinds of interactions, although you're not like actually in person, but you can have, exchanges of ideas and have conferences and those kinds of things without actually physically being in person in those places. And it could actually be really good if you care about climate science. It could be good for the climate too. I've also seen that there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done on getting people to even get an image that looks like this and sounds like this, even though this isn't like a perfect ideal setup in a studio or whatever. There are even like very, important politicians that have horrible sound quality, horrible video quality. There was a billionaire that we worked with on a video that really needed more help. They needed at least like a camera that was decent to record them. They could have done that, and they didn't do it. And it would have greatly improved the look of the video that was produced. So, there's a huge opportunity actually for video production experts to work with people around the world to get them to have their own home studios work so much better and look so much better in person. I'd already seen this being a problem with doing, because I already work remotely, so I have meetings all the time that are remote. I'd already seen this being an issue with technology, how people would have poor audio quality, poor video quality. But the more people that are having to do this for their job, the more they really need to know, or at least have experts either training them or setting up studios or something similar. So on the video front, that's what I've seen most, is how there's just a lot of work to be done, and that's a good opportunity for anybody that's looking to create a business. I don't know if I would want to do that, but I mean, I already have to do that. With part of my job is to like help people with like lighting and to get like their video quality to look decent for the kind of videos that we have to produce. But for the regular people out there, like in Australia, for example, if nobody is thinking to work with local educators or with whoever on how to create their own home studio, or to use like OBS to figure out how to like do screen shares with a bunch of different things, either through Zoom or it could be through whatever, to do actual presentations and have them be where they're effective. um, you know, that's an opportunity for video production experts in this particular time. That's what I think. Uh, what's for dinner tonight? Actually, I don't know. Nah, dude, I made pizza yesterday. I put so many jalapenos on it. It was actually like too spicy for me. Like at one point, like I had my last slice, I was like, man, my mouth is burning. Cause like, yeah, yeah, I totally dig pizza. And you know what? Since moving out from the West Coast, like into the South in the United States, this is really interesting. I don't remember this on the West Coast, but out here, you can go to the store and you can pick up like pre-made dough that isn't like slapped out or anything yet. Like I can get like a ball of dough, and it's actually pretty decent dough, and proof it, do the second proofing at home, and then just slap out the dough myself, and it's great. Like it's awesome. I do not want to have to create my own pizza dough because it's difficult to do right. But yeah, I have no idea I don't know if my wife is making something or if we're getting takeout. I don't remember. We have ribs in the fridge thawing, but I don't remember if we're having that or not. I'm not making dinner tonight. Um, so yeah, I did a digital conference conference. I did a digital conference. It was fairly awful. It was the for health services research. Zoom call keynotes, not my thing. Yeah. Uh, I'll tell you this. People are going to be doing that more. Okay. I had to work with my supervisor at work and figure out how we can essentially run things like Zoom conferences and stuff like that, because more and more people are going to want that kind of thing. If you look at the ATEM, whatever it is, the ATEM switcher. I don't know if if you're supposed to say Atom or if it's just ATEM, but the switcher that's from Blackmagic Design, that cheap $300 one, dude, that kind of thing. If you get to know how to use that kind of switcher, you know how to use stuff like OBS and Zoom. There is going to be a lot more. My crystal ball tells me that we are going to see a lot more of that kind of thing being necessary in video production, because people are learning how to use cameras. Okay, people are learning how to use cameras. They're are happy enough with the kind of quality that you're seeing from streaming to do their kind of conferences and all that. That might be where we go. So I mean, that might be the case, that we're as video production workers, that if you don't know how to facilitate that as part of your services that you provide, maybe that's what you need to start learning, to be more viable as a worker or a business owner in video production today. That's what I think. Steve says, yes, I think you're right. Yeah, I mean, that's what I think. I honestly think that for video production, I don't know where it's going to go, especially with COVID. It's like people are understanding how to use more of this digital stuff now than ever, and it's going to be very different. Even after COVID, I feel like the feel from I mean the market's going to feel the same kind of stuff for probably at least a generation from this, because it's such an upset to the apple cart. Totally changes the game on what is being expected. Like, if you just think of how many people are employed right now working at conferences to set up audio video, only to find out that, in the next few years, even after COVID, that you have maybe half the amount of people going to conferences. Dude, that cuts your work in half. That is devastating, devastating to an industry. So, if you look at how cameras, even in the camera markets, how when phones really started to have decent cameras, how it's just devastated the interchangeable lens camera market. It's just killed it almost. I mean, luckily a lot of those companies have other things that they do, but you look at the sales between like when cameras and phones started to get good to where they are now, it's horrible, if you're in that industry. Can't have too many jalapenos. Yep. Trader Joe's though, I didn't see it there. Like, maybe it's because I didn't go to Trader Joe's enough when I lived in San Diego, but yeah, ATIM, I think they say. Okay, so ATIM. Okay, yeah, I just didn't know how to say it. I hadn't seen any videos about it. I just had seen the thing. So thanks for that. So I got about 10 minutes left. Got about 10 minutes left on this. Let's see. Let's see here. I'll see if there's one more comment on here that I can look at. Oh, yeah. I wanted to point this out. This person asked, check out this channel. I know I got a decent tutor. Cool. Can I have a question? If you change your timeline color space to Rec 2020, but your output is still Rec 709, then what would happen when you export these clips? Does that mean it still clip the red value? So this is a good question. I didn't really talk a lot about this. The thing is, like, when they were commenting on the how I graded it, the nature video that I made. It was called Bee's Knees or whatever. And in the timeline color space, I changed it to Rec 2020. And the thing is that you'd probably find this out on your own, but when I talk about doing color management and doing grading and doing work the way that I do it, I say that I basically do grading in one step and then I do the edit in differently. So, like, I don't do like the edit and the grade all in one project and one timeline like that. I do them separately. So when when I bring in, say, a Rec 2020 footage into DaVinci Resolve and I do my edit with that, I'm not going to have a problem rendering it to Rec 709 because I have everything all set to Rec 709 anyway, because it's only editing, it's not grading, right? But when you're grading, let's say you do a grade and an edit all at once, which I don't really do, if you play it in a player and you have it set to like Rec 2020 in your timeline color space and you went and rendered that, when you play it back, sometimes it depends on the player, but it will actually think that it's supposed to be a Rec 2020 file, and it'll play like Rec 2020, which looks different. It will not play correctly. So if you do that, if you use color management and you change your timeline color space to something other than Rec 709, chances are that you're going to have to, and you want that to play back correctly in a player, you need to go into the tags and the render settings and change it to Rec 709 or it won't play back right. You either do that, or if you do an edit, once you render out your grades, you essentially take that and then put into a Rec 709 timeline later in the edit, and then you render that, and it will fix it, essentially. You'll never see that problem if you do it that way, which is probably why I never had that issue. But for people who do have it, that's probably why your colors don't look right when you play it back. And also interesting, this was on Facebook. There was a complaint, and I see this complaint a lot, and it was about how they claim that YouTube changes their color in their video to something else. I just kind of want to talk about this. The thing is that I haven't really seen that, and it's because I think that if you are seeing it, it's probably something to do with either your settings in your browser, or it's the settings that you have maybe in your playback software. Like if you're using VLC or whatever, and you have some settings turned on, or if you're using like QuickTime or a number of other players, and it's correcting it, and you haven't turned that off, that could be part of the problem. And sometimes that happens in the settings in the browser, and sometimes it happens in the settings in your player. Not only that, but the metadata that you're sending, like your video is encoded, and when it gets decoded, depending on the player, it could decode it in a completely different way from another player. Okay? And you need to understand that. And that's what kind of sucks about doing anything in color grading, is that you don't have a ton of control over everything. Okay? The most obvious things, I'll kind of go through the steps, right? First of all, you have to make sure that your monitor is calibrated properly for sRGB for stuff that's going to appear on the web. If you don't have it calibrated correctly for sRGB or Rec 709, Rec 709 is close enough, then it's going to appear differently when you use it. Because the colors won't line up. Your calibration's got to be there first. Then the second thing is that your room that you're in. You'll see if you have a monitor that's calibrated for a dark room versus one that's calibrated for a bright room. If you have it calibrated, say, for a bright room, and then you turn all your lights down and it's pitch black, and you look at your screen, it's going to look different because your eyes view it differently. Your eyes lie to you, and your eyes will not you're as great as your eyes are, they're not like perfectly attuned for every like situation and make it all look the same. It doesn't work like that. This is also true, and I did this with my wife when we were checking out different paints. When you look at white, right, you have a paint that says white on it. And then someone says, well, that's a warm white. And you go, no, it's not. Look, I can see it. It's just white. But you don't see that it's a warm white until you take another one and you compare it. And you go, oh my God, that's like a yellow looking white versus this one that looks kind of blue. And then you have another white that you bring in that looks completely different. It will be like in between the two. And that one might be actual pure white as close as possible, while you have a warmer one and you have a cooler one, and you can see the differences at that point. But if you just have the one and you have nothing to compare it to, your eyes will assume that it's just a regular white. Okay, I hope you understand that. And it's a similar thing with your monitors and seeing it in different rooms. If you have yellow on the walls versus blue on the walls versus green on the walls, having it bright in the room or dark in the room, you're going to perceive things on your screen totally differently. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is after you render it, you got to make sure you got the right codecs down. Okay, that should be simple enough. Then the player is going to determine how the colors actually end up looking. I've seen total, even with no settings on, like that change anything, no automatic settings or adding contrast or sharpness or none of that, a difference between Windows Media Player, Vimeo, YouTube, VLC, QuickTime. They can all look different. They can all look totally different, and they can all look where certain colors look similar enough, but the contrast looks totally different, or shadows are interpreted one way or the other, or even like the sharpness of the image can look different. It's really crazy how different they can look. Okay, and then the browsers, the difference between Firefox, I guess now it's Microsoft Edge instead of Internet Explorer, and Chrome. They can all look different, okay, depending on the settings and depending on a number of things. Sometimes they just look different. There's nothing you can do about it. And then another thing about it is that Now the receiver, the viewer of your content, probably doesn't have a calibrated monitor at all. It probably probably their monitor is like has a green or a magenta tint, and they'll complain about how it looks because they don't even have their monitor calibrated right, and they see everything totally, in a green zone or in a magenta zone and don't even know it until they see an actually calibrated monitor next to them and they go, "Oh my God, that there's a huge difference there." But they would never have known. Um, and this is something that I've noticed through my time, and that's why I use scopes, because the scopes don't lie to you. Like, you can look at something and think it looks right, and then your scopes tell you, well, you've got it completely wrong because red's not red or green's not green, that kind of thing. So, and you can't even control that. You cannot even control that. And then a lot of times, whatever color differences you're seeing, some people don't even care about. They just won't even care at all. They will not care at all. And they'll have they have their settings that they put on their TVs or their monitors or their laptops or their phones where it's like they've increased the saturation to where everything looks muddy. They've, added a bunch of contrast. They have the brightness like way, way, way up where even like where the dark shadows are supposed to be, they'll see all this noise because they've basically artificially increased the noise by just like increasing the brightness on their phone to where they can actually see it when they're not supposed to see that. I mean, there's so many things that get in the way of someone else viewing your content the way that you intended, that if you focus too much on what you can't really control and kind of complain about it, your head will explode. There's only so much that you can control when it comes to this stuff. So I guess what I would say is just don't worry about it so much. Outside of those things you can control. If you get it, you got the right color space down for your intended target, you've rendered it, you've made it, you've used your scopes to get it as accurate as you need to. You've got the look the way you want. That's the best you can do, and sometimes there's things like players that mess with your colors and there's nothing you can do about it. There's just nothing you can do about it. And it's partly why one of my arguments that I've made quite often is that with the better and better and better we get cameras, for example, and all that kind of stuff, if we can't actually display what that camera can do in the way that content's delivered, maybe we shouldn't worry about it so much. Like with the 12K situation we were talking about before, maybe 12K and 8K and 6K and all this has these really, really great things. But if people can't get fast enough internet to stream that quality, then what difference does it make? Because streaming is the way that people see most content now. Most of it's all done digitally. Who prints out photos anymore? And how many people look at photos on their phone versus on their monitor? And how many people have 4K monitors, which are only 8 megapixels, right? And most people are probably going to have an HD monitor, which is not even close to 8 megapixels. So, you're talking about having 8K video. Well, when, if you actually watch a Blu-ray, go get now it's like ancient technology, but you get HD Blu-ray, you play that, and you compare that to 4K YouTube streaming. The 4K YouTube streaming looks like garbage because the way that the HD is compressed and delivered through the disc looks better. It just looks better, and if you took 4K and you had a disc with that on there versus a streaming 4K, you can imagine how much better the 4K is going to look compared to the streaming 4K. So the bottleneck as far as the quality, the bottlenecks as far as quality of our images, when it comes to color, it comes to dynamic range, it comes to sharpness, really any of that stuff, really the big problem we have is in the way it's delivered. We just don't have a robust enough delivery system to get people stream content that looks even close to what you see even in HD. I got really annoyed when I got the Pocket 4K, and I hadn't upgraded cameras in a long time for video. I got that and I was like, man, this HD file looks just absolutely incredible. Like the HD files, dude, they look so good. But you'd never know that if all you did was stream the Pocket 4K footage. You would never know, because you can't see if you get an HD render and you put it on something like YouTube or even Vimeo or whatever, depending on your stream settings and depending on how good that bottleneck is, you're never going to see it because of the distribution. It has nothing to do with the camera, has nothing to do with the way you shot it or graded it or whatever. It just, it ends up looking like junk because of things you can't even control. So, all right, last set of comments, and then I'm going to head out. One Barak, I stopped seeing that when I published Direct 709. Yeah, when you publish Direct 709, you shouldn't see issues. They're probably watching on warm iPhone. Yeah, I noticed that, like, I guess on phones, like, I would see that. Last time I was on the plane, I kept seeing that where, like, some people's phones, like, if they'd have their phones out and they'd be watching stuff, and some people would be watching the same movie, right? And you'd see, like, one person is just, like, yellow, and it was, disgusting. And then others were, audio cut out. Let me see. No, audio shouldn't be cut out. Okay. So anyway, like, I would go down the aisles and I'd see people watching the same movie, and it would be like, this person's is like this like sepia tone looking thing, and then another one's got like yellow, the other one's got like blue, another one looks more neutral by comparison. And I'm going, how can you even watch it when it's yellow like that? But again, it's, I guess it's because I make sure that my devices are as set properly as possible, and I look at like multiple devices to make sure things are looking right, and I calibrate that. If you're used to seeing it all in yellow, that's how it looks. This is a story. This will be a last story, promise. But a friend of mine, he had an old rear projection TV at his house, and that thing they had for, I think, like 10 years. And I hadn't been over there for a while to watch anything. So we went over there and we were playing, we went and we were going to play like, Space Invaders on Nintendo 64, right? And we go in there and we turn on the TV, and like his dad was watching tennis, and everything was green. Everything was green. Like, and I'm not just trying to say like, because I was like, at the time I wasn't thinking about doing color correction or anything like that. I just didn't have a TV that had lost like all of its magenta values. And it was just, everything looked green. And I was like, dude, what's wrong with your TV? Everything looks green. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, dude, look, like, you can't see that everything looks green on the television? Like, you can't see that? And they said, I don't know what you're talking about. This looks fine. Like, they weren't even kidding with me. Like, his dad was like kind of offended that I was saying there's something wrong with their TV. It looked green. And I'm damn sure that the reason was because they'd just been seeing it wrong for so long that they just didn't see it wrong anymore. It just looked normal to them that, whites were completely green. So anyway, last few statements here. YouTube high contrast, high saturation is like the race to maxed out volume in the music industry. Yeah, I know what you mean. The high, what was I gonna say? How they increase the volume on like CDs or whatever, to sell more copies, but that actually ruins some of the values of the sound. I know what you mean. Cool. Yeah, see you later, Steve. I'm out anyway. So thanks everybody for coming. If you haven't yet, I'll just quickly, once again, put the Facebook group on here so that you guys can join. I would really like to have more discussions on this forum because I think it would be a good place to have discussions. So there's the group. And I will see you guys not next week, but the week after, okay? We're going to be doing these every other week for the near future, just because I need some time to do some other stuff. So I'll catch y'all later, and be safe and have a good week.